Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Cloud Wars Live. We're digging into the digital revolution, which seems to be becoming even more revolutionary these days. We've got metaverses. We've got new products coming out of all sorts of places. We've got new job titles. We've got new expectations. And I think I talk sometimes about how the digital revolution is changing every aspect of our personal and professional lives. And I just think we're seeing those lines blurring. So everywhere in between, maybe it all gets rolled up into the metaverse. But anyway, one of our great friends here, and he's become a fantastic contributor at Acceleration Economy as an analyst, is Wayne Sadin. Wayne is an advisor to boards of directors and to CEOs on how to infuse digital thinking into their overall business strategy and grow and thrive in the digital economy. Wayne, welcome. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Yeah, Bob, it's been a pleasure for 3 years. And as you say, now we're going into a new pivot, right? Even our own relationship with Acceleration Economy. It's really terrific being part of what you've built and what the other guys have built. And it's terrific to be able to talk more about this stuff pretty much every day.
Yeah. Well, Wayne, thank you. It's and the perspectives that you're able to bring from having been a CIO and a chief digital officer and a chief technology officer, I really admire how you're able to take that knowledge forward with you, that always think like a business person, business first. And I hope that's a direction that more people in CIO, CTO camp will take, right? Never to hold back on their expertise and the significance of it, but understanding now it's not some out on the fringes department that runs the servers. It is indispensable to everything that goes on now in any sort of big organization. So Wayne, great stuff here. And I imagine, like always, you've got a pretty full menu of things to talk about. I know that let's just maybe start with this one. We talk about the data-driven economy, data cultures, data-driven decisions, and so on like that. Seems like there's a new generation of tools coming in to help companies achieve that. And I wonder, Wayne, what your perspective is on some of these new things.
Yeah, well, let's start with databases. I started my technical career as a database person back around when relational databases came out. And I'm embarrassed to say how long ago that was, but the relational model was accepted as a business tool about 40 years ago. And the opportunity for the relational model was it lets CEOs and board members and executives ask questions that they hadn't thought of ahead of time. Prior to that, you had to build the question into the database and design it around the question. So with the relational model, you could now ask a general question. And that was terrific for a long time. But then we came up with more and more and more data from more and more places. And we had this thing called big data. And the definition of big data means our tools are no longer big enough. That's the definition. At any given time, big data is a different number of megabytes and gigabytes, and petabytes and exabytes and zettabytes and yottabytes, a lot of bytes. But it just means we've outgrown our tools. And so we had the Database Battleground, and we got some really interesting vendors in front of us to talk about what's happened in databases over the last 10 years. And for the executive, the new database technology is game-changing. Because first of all, it's in the cloud, which means scalability is how big a check can you write, not how many racks can you put in your basement.
Yeah.
I worked on a lot of projects where we did things like took walls out of office buildings in Manhattan and flew mainframes in with helicopters. Or we dug trenches around our building and built a bigger basement to put the mainframes. It's a different world now. Let somebody else dig the holes and hang the things with helicopters. Executive just says, I need to do 10 times as much data. We say, okay, let's do 10 times as much data. And so the key concept I want to leave the executive with, without getting mired in the technical stuff, is the notion of a lake house. It's a cute term that means you have a data lake, which is your transactional data, and you have a data warehouse, which is your analytical data. In the past, you had two sets of data spaces, and they were kind of different. And you spent a lot of time taking the data from one place and putting it in another, kind of getting it ready for consumption by the end user.
And Wayne, you probably had to have a staff of gardeners and painters and landscapers and, taking care of that lake house 12 months a year.
I used to live on the Gulf Coast, so yes, you need a lot to take care of your database. But preparing the data was a very manual process. And with a lakehouse, the idea, different vendors call it different things, but with having a conjoined data store, a combined data store, if you need to ask a question about data up to the minute, up to the second, up to the millisecond, you got it. And you don't have to have an army of the priests like me with the white coats doing complicated transforms. So from the CEO, board, chief business officer kind of space, there are radical new ways to ask questions and get the answers faster and better. And that's the takeaway from the database battleground.
Yeah, yeah, it was remarkable in there too that Wayne, there's a lot of these companies are pretty new, right? They've been launched in the last 5 to 10 years, and they've spent almost all of that time in the laboratory creating these new tools. And it's been really wild to watch over the last 6, 8, 9 months. A flood of these companies now starting to, okay, we're ready to start to engage with the market. So it is, I think, for customers, as you've described it, it drives a great amount of value. But I think it's been interesting watching it too, Wayne, on that tech industry side, watching this ripple up through some of the big established companies who, as always happens here, they say, okay, the stuff that got us here isn't going to get us there. We've got to compete. We've got to innovate. We've got to do some of these new things as well. And I just think it's one of those cases where, as always, the big winners in the cloud wars are the customers.
Yeah, absolutely. As a customer for most of my career, my goal as a CIO is to empower my business users. And so whether it's an old message I want to send too with the established vendors is a lot of them have built the tooling into their tools so that big data no longer overwhelms the tool until you get much bigger, much faster, much more variety. They are not just the plain old relational model, but they haven't necessarily broken their link with the past. So if you're an enterprise customer, you've been using these database tools for 40 years. And to say, well, I'm just going to dump my database and put my exabytes onto some tool I never heard of because it's in the press, well, companies aren't going to do that. I worked in some conservative industries, but don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. Your vendor of the past can be your vendor of the future. But on the other hand, don't be slavishly tied to them. And Bob, that makes a point. You talked about the CIO has to be a business person, but at the same time, a message to the CEO and the board, you can't dump your CIO and say, let's replace them with a pure business person, because somebody has to be able to sort out, well, my old vendor says this, and the new vendor uses the sexier, cooler term, because they don't want to scare off the traditional customer, perhaps. So what is a real innovation that'll make me money, save me money, improve my customer experience, improve the world? And what is a piece of marketing fluff that sounds real good and then gets reprinted in the newspaper? Yeah. So don't give up the technical in favor of the business, but don't give up the business either. And that's the point you made earlier.
Yeah, yeah. So Wayne, I know one of the new types of issues that these business technology leaders are confronting now too, and you see it across every industry and all across the world, is this notion of sustainability. And I think it is something that every company wants to embrace, right? And the tools that some of the different technology vendors are coming out with now to help companies manage that are interesting, but I think they're still sort of feeling their way along about how do we position this, right? How do we address the need that with technology that customers have that can be more than just, perhaps the simple, carbon offset or some of that goofiness that I think has dominated the conversation for too long. It sounds like you've been impressed by at least what some of these companies are doing.
I don't say goofiness, because what will happen is some upstart company will put 3 people on your board and force you to change your entire business plan. They did it with energy companies, so be careful. We really are in an environment where, for reasons, whether you believe it or not, agree with it or not, investors say we care, regulators say we care, and frankly, the upcoming generation brought up in this world says we care, and so companies care. I mean, I care. Again, I lived in places we were running out of things. Global warming was definitely affecting South Texas. It was getting warmer and wetter there. So companies have this obligation to their regulators, an obligation to the investors. We can't dismiss that unless you can shrug off the market, which most can't. You got to do what they want you to do. So, but the real key for me is the vendors that I've seen have talked about their carbon accounting. We can manage your carbon as though it was another kind of currency. And that's terrific for cap and trade. That's terrific for meeting international accords, for producing reports for your shareholders and investors. But you know what? I'm an engineer at heart. The real key to sustainability is using energy better. And so ERP vendors and ERP customers don't give up on the idea that if you can schedule your trucks 15% better, because your order management talks to your manufacturing, talks to your warehouse management, supply chain management, and even talks to your contractor management and external party management, the truck arrives when it's supposed to and doesn't sit idling for 2 hours or 2 days. The machines are running when they're supposed to and don't produce stuff that you scrap and put in the garbage. And that's really the key. It's not accounting for how bad we are. It's using it better. And by the way, that makes companies more money. That makes customers happier because you get them the stuff sooner and more accurately, and it helps the world at large. And so that's my message to the sustainability vendors. Keep working for the reporting so we know how we're doing, but customers focus on how you can re-engineer your physical processes to drive efficiency into them.
Wayne, I think that's a perfect example of over time we've seen things like how companies, businesses, not the tech industry, but businesses say, oh, geez, I have to start to handle this governance issue. I've got to handle security better. I've got to handle certain regulatory issues. And for a while, the tech industry was cooking up solutions that were sort of bolt-ons, right? You'd stick it on the outside and it solved a narrow, specific problem, but somewhat in isolation. I think what you're describing here about companies that just focus on certain narrow slices of sustainability accounting. Okay, check, we did that without addressing the larger issue, make the whole company better and take care of this issue that's come up. It really is, I think, Wayne, a fantastic example you've cited here of this new way that companies have to think about the impact of technology, not as a little isolated one-off, but part of an end-to-end continuum.
Absolutely. And again, I think it's also the key that IT and OT are starting to coalesce. How we use our computer to print a paycheck, to do a pretty bar chart, to produce a website, that's very interesting. How do we use the computer to drive a truck, to mine dangerous materials, to manufacture things when our factory has a COVID outbreak? These are the kind of things that we're starting to be able to do. And there's great power, and with that should come great accountability when we're automating things in the physical world. As I've said before, it's not just the paycheck gets printed wrong, it's stuff blows up and buildings burn down and people get injured. So CEOs, board members, be thoughtful about how you're automating, but don't shy away from it. Get the right people advising you, get the right people having the right conversation, and let's drive efficiency through the entire supply chain, from order management through the fulfillment, that says we can deliver without friction. We can deliver without waste, because so much of what we do is wasted. And we've got to fix that. And we're right there. If we just embrace the vision, we can fix it. The digital transformation is not just bits in the cloud, it's stuff on the ground.
Yeah. Perfectly said, Wayne. I know in a second here, we're going to talk a little bit about sort of the big new world of the metaverse. But I first want to share a message from our sponsor, BMC. We all know what the A game is, right? Among athletes, it's the highest level of performance, and you can get to that level in business as well. BMC calls this the autonomous digital enterprise. It's when technology and people work in harmony, and that's how business reaches its A game. You can find out more at bmc.com/A game. So, Wayne, the meta topic, the meta discussion has come up so frequently lately. I do talk to a number of people who either scratch that and say, what the heck is this? Or I don't care about it. And is this just another construct in some ways that, an industry, in this case, the tech industry, has dreamed up to convince people they need to buy more stuff? And, legitimate questions, but I think there are actually some extraordinary things going on here, right? With a huge amount of potential. And again, I think the particular perspective that you bring toward these things is helpful. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on, what is going on, the company that changed its name to Meta, and then the larger issue of the metaverse.
Let's start with the company that changed its name to Meta. We talk, you and I, a lot about digital transformation. Remember my definition. It's a board and C-suite driven rethinking, reimagining of your culture, your markets, your products, your customer experience, and your employee experience. That's either brought about through technology or forced because of technology. So let's talk about a couple of things about these digital transformation. They're lengthy, they're risky, and they're ugly. They are the ultimate BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal that a company might have. It's reinventing your company. So the board of directors, as we've talked about, doesn't often support the CEO who says, I'm going to take an extra $10 billion in investment. I'm going to let my profit drop by some large amount, and I'm going to wipe a quarter of the market share off the company's value one afternoon.
That's not a winning formula?
Yes, it is, but boards don't see it, you see. And you know what? Investors are even less willing to see it. Monotonically increasing earnings is the mantra of the business school. Now, if you're a billionaire founder, you get a little bit more latitude. Steve Jobs did, whatever Steve Jobs wanted. He changed the company how many times? I remember when Larry Ellison pivoted Oracle from technology, databases, to applications. People said, there's no money in applications. It's dying. Everybody's going to write their own code, and AI is going to do it for them. Yeah, that was a pretty good bet. But if he wasn't Larry Ellison with his ownership and control of the company, could he have pulled it off? I say not. Look at Bill Gates pivoting to the internet, Satya Nadella to the cloud and to the openness of Microsoft. And now we're seeing it play out right in front of us. Whether you like Zuckerberg or you don't like Zuckerberg, you like Facebook, you don't like Facebook, he really had the courage of his convictions. He is transforming the company into something. He's not even quite sure what. And we'll talk about the metaverse in a minute, but he's willing to invest his own fortune, his reputation, and the livelihood of hundreds of thousands of employees to make a radically different course for his company based on his vision and hopefully his board's vision of where the world is going. You talk about the greatest growth market the world has ever seen. Well, guess what? We're about to enter another growth market on top of that last growth market that may be even bigger than the one before it, because it's really overturning so much of what we've held near and dear for 30 years.
Wayne, I think it was Satya Nadella, and right now I think Microsoft, I would say, has as much of an opportunity and as much leverage to help shape and define what this metaverse is perceived to be, what it actually becomes in some way as any executive. And in an earnings call recently, as he was talking about it, he described it in different ways. But in a large scale sense, one of the things he said, it is the next wave of the internet. So if we take a look back at the last 20, 25 years and see, how the internet has changed things. And just as you put it too, Nadella is saying, this is the next wave, what's going to happen here. So I think sometimes it's just an interesting little mental exercise here. If you look back 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, how things were then, and look at how much has changed now. And that going forward, there's going to be at least that much change, probably significantly more. It'll happen in a shorter time with a deeper intensity. So as you peer into your crystal ball, Wayne, with the benefit of your expertise and experience and people you've talked to today, what should business people be thinking about the metaverse?
Well, let's start with the Nadella comment you just recited to us. It's going to be like the internet again. So if somebody had said to a mainframe user, a big bank, a big insurance company, a big airline 30 years ago, well, there's this internet thing, they'd say fine, and they'd be building another $100 million data center to stuff it full of mainframes to string proprietary slow cables into for these custom terminals that were sitting in wherever they were doing business. If you had told them, oh, by the way, that means everything you know about technology is wrong. Most of what you know about business is wrong. And by the way, the world, the consumers are going to change so radically, you won't even recognize them. So I think Nadella said what he said the way he said it, because if he went running around with his hair on fire, shouting and rending his clothes, investors would get a little skittish. But that's what the real proponents of Web3 and the metaverse are talking about. They're talking about upending the apple cart. And so we don't know whether the model we have today, the internet of large companies and large networks, and this kind of the way it works today, where we have regulators looking at our companies too big, or is it going to completely decentralize? But the Web3 proponents are talking about radical decentralization, insanely better communications, and quite frankly, a whole new generation of security, of identity management, of money management. How does money work is going to be redefined. So let's start. That's not the metaverse. That's the stuff under the metaverse that's changing also. On top of that is the metaverse, which today is really AR and VR and teleoperation, telepresence. It's all of that consensual reality that we're building on top. Can we build the metaverse stuff, the AR, VR, on top of what we have today? Yeah, Activision's doing it. And Microsoft's acquisition is leveraging their knowledge of gamification, their knowledge of 3D space creation, of interaction. So, yeah, but the real stuff is not happening, with all due respect to Microsoft and Facebook, Meta, is not happening in those big companies. The real interesting stuff is happening at the edges of the industry. It's people you never heard of doing things you never imagined. When I go to a trade show, and I've been to many, I'm wearing an IBM shirt when I was at a trade show. And by the way, 8 years ago, I was not at the booth in the middle with the people with the money. I was in the booths at the edge, the people who could afford enough to scrape together a booth, throw a tablecloth over it, and talk about some wacky idea. And that's where I think even the conferences we hold, I'm going to spend that time. Yeah. I want to spend that time talking to people that nobody's listening to, because one of them is going to be right. We just don't know which one. So the message for the CEO, for the board, is the world is going to change faster, as you said, than it did over the last 20, 30 years. So what took 30 might take 10 or 15. So as an executive, be ready. Be ready to jump in a direction you can't imagine. Be ready to transform to a product in a market you don't know, because we don't know it. And I don't care what pundit tells you they know it. They don't know it. The world will look different than we think it will look. So if you're a CEO and you're a board, the key is what the investment community calls optionality, the ability to choose different options and not be constrained to go in one direction. And that means don't have the IT of the past trying to be the springboard to the future of the metaverse. Don't have your 30-year-old system. And by the way, I don't care if it's mainframe or cloud. Yeah. The architecture matters. How do you see the world? How do you tie into the industry cloud players matters. So the CEO, the board, the CIO should be thinking, how do I give the company the ability to go in this direction or this direction, and then be open to the ideas of the metaverse and adopt what will help you, whether you're an innovator, a fast follower, in the middle, a laggard. Be thinking about technology as part of your strategy. So to bring it around full circle, what you said, the CEO and the CIO need to be closer than ever. And the CIO needs to be somebody that can get a seat at the table. That's the CIO's accountability. Are you there? And then the CEO has to give them that seat. The board has to give them that seat so that we are closer linked and we can make choices and decisions faster and with more perspective. And that's the key with the metaverse. It is going to be something. It is going to be something very different, and it's going to be something very fast. And so we in the acceleration economy, Bob, you're part of it. We have a My Metaverse Minute channel hosted by Kieran Allen. And we're going to be talking a lot about the metaverse and trying to figure it out ourselves. So I ask everybody to come take that journey with us, and we'll all be able to jump faster, further, and in a new direction. And that's what makes companies the big bucks going forward.
Yeah, Wayne, that's great. We are having a lot of fun with the My Metaverse Minute content that Kieran is creating at Acceleration Economy here. But Wayne, just a final thought I want to share, echo back to you something that you said earlier, and this is in the context of what you're describing for business leaders. How do you get prepared to be able to leap in some direction that you don't know what it'll be, how far, how high, how fast, and what's going to be under your feet when you complete that leap? So I think it was your 5-point description of digital transformation, right? That involves your customers, but first of all, your culture, your markets, your products, your customer experience, and employee experience. The culture thing up front, if you've got the greatest strategy and plans in the world, but your culture is one of like, nah, I don't think so. It's not going to work. So this bigger thing, as you've said many times, the digital transformation involves technology, but it's not about technology. It's about these other things that then technology helps enable. So before people make this big metaverse leap, and as they get into condition to make that leap and they go through the training and prep for it, boy, I hope they take, your words to heart, especially that notion about culture.
Absolutely. You hit it right in the head, and we've got lots of columns where we unpack that concept. Culture is not, as I recently wrote, going to the office for a birthday party with the staff. It is about how I drive a message and how I listen to my employees, listen to my customers, listen to my market, watch my competitors, and then try to shape the company people want to work for. Try to shape the company that we feel like we're part of the same goal, we're pulling together, or certainly we want to like the people we work with as coworkers. We want to believe in the company. And the beauty of the change that's coming up as part of the COVID transition and the technology transition with work from anywhere, people are having the opportunity to align their personal values with the values of the companies they work for. And we as companies need to be stating those values. We are in the energy business. We are in the clean energy business. We are in the how do we get the most value out of energy or whatever. If we're in transportation, are we autonomous transportation? Or do we believe in the future of electric bikes? Or do we want to build buses? Or do we want to build race cars? Yeah. And as employees, with the Great Resignation or Great Reset or whatever you call it, let's align ourselves. And that's the key, is the executive needs to be able to state their mission, their ethos, and boards need to be on board with that. Yeah. And it's not okay to say our mission is to make money for our shareholders. I think that our generation might have put up with that. Generation Z that's coming up into the workforce is not. I mentor MBA students, and they start with, this is what I want to do with my life, not this is how much money I want to make. Not, I want to get to Wall Street or the Big Four. It's like, this is how I want to change the world. And I envy them. They have a tremendous opportunity, maybe more than generations before them had, certainly in the United States. And we've got to enable, as corporate executives, the right opportunity for them to thrive and to flourish and to affect the world in positive ways. And we've got the technology. Now it's up to us as leaders to use that wisely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Wayne, it's been a great conversation, touching on some big things with some very practical counsel that you always offer here. So thank you. It's been delightful, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Yep. I predict that you'll see me again soon, and I look forward to having more conversations around all of these topics with you and with anybody else that wants to talk about it.
And folks, now you can engage with Wayne. As Wayne said, he's one of the top people on our Acceleration Economy Analyst Network. You can see Wayne's work on columns, on some of the digital roundtables we do, many other formats. So Wayne's got good things to say, and we're going to try to expose more of those out to everybody. So folks, to all of you, thanks for being with us here at Cloud Wars Live. Hope things are going great for you. We'll see you again soon.